Have you ever stopped and wondered why some industries feel like this battleground of brands, while in others, you have basically no choice at all? Well, the answer comes down to something called market structure. And trust me, getting a handle on this is key to understanding the prices we pay and the choices we get every single day. All right, let's get into it.
I mean, really think about it. You walk into a store and you're just hit with this wall of different soaps, right? But then the power bill comes, and it's from the same company every single month. That's not a coincidence. It's because the market for soap and the market for electricity are built on completely different foundations. So what is this market structure thing anyway? Well, you can think of it as the rule book for the game of business in any given industry. It basically tells us how many companies are in the ring, what kind of stuff they're selling, and, this is the big one, how much power each of those companies has to set its own price. So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through the entire spectrum of competition. We'll start at the two absolute extremes, then we'll dive into the really interesting middle grounds where most businesses actually live. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by looking at what this all means for you and me, the consumers.
To really get a grip on this, the best way to start is by looking at the two polar opposites. Think of it like this. On one side, you've got the Wild West of competition, and on the other, a kingdom with just one single ruler. First up, let's talk about perfect competition. Picture a gigantic farmer's market. You've got tons of sellers, and they're all selling, say, potatoes that are pretty much identical. It's also super easy for a new farmer to just roll up and set up their own stall. Now, because of all this, no single farmer can suddenly decide to charge $5 for a potato you can get for 50 cents next door. You just walk away. For you, the customer, this is awesome. It means all that competition pushes prices down as low as they can possibly go.
And this leads us to a really crucial idea. In this kind of market, firms are what we call price takers. They have zero, nada power to set the price. They just have to accept or take whatever the going market rate is. Their only real choice is how many potatoes they're going to sell at that price.
Okay, now let's swing all the way to the other side of the universe, the monopoly. Here, there's only one seller, period. Think about your local water company. They're the only ones selling piped water to your house, right? And the barriers to entry are huge. I mean, imagine the cost of laying a whole new set of pipes. This gives them enormous power. And with no rivals, there's not much pressure to keep prices low or even improve service, which is exactly why governments so often have to step in and regulate them.
So because a monopolist is the only game in town, they're not a price taker. No, they are a price maker. They have a ton of control and can pretty much set the price wherever they want to make the most profit. There's nobody there to undercut them. So let's just put them side by side. On one hand, you have many sellers. On the other, just one. Identical products versus a totally unique one. And the most important part, absolutely no control over price versus a whole lot of control. This shows you the two extremes of market power perfectly. You've got the price takers and you've got the price makers.
But of course, most of the world doesn't really live at these extremes. So let's venture into the middle ground. First up is something called monopolistic competition. This is where companies get their power not by being the only choice, but by being a different choice.
This is the world you and I live in every day. The market for restaurants, for clothes, for soaps. I mean, there are tons of options, but they're not all the same, are they? A fancy Italian restaurant isn't really a substitute for a drive-through burger joint, even though, yeah, they both sell food.
This market structure is this really cool hybrid. See, on one hand, you've got a lot of sellers, just like in perfect competition. But, and here's the twist, the products are not identical. This is all about something called product differentiation. Each company is spending a ton of money on branding, packaging, and advertising to make their products seem unique and special. So in a way, every restaurant has a little mini monopoly on its own special recipe or atmosphere. And for us, well, it means we get a ton of variety, but all that marketing gets baked right into the price we pay.
All right, let's move on to our last stop on the spectrum, which you could argue is the most powerful force in our modern economy. This is where you don't have one ruler or a massive crowd, but a small council of giants that pretty much runs the show. This is an oligopoly. Oligopoly literally means competition among the few. So think about industries like airlines, car manufacturers, or your cell phone provider. There are only a handful of major players calling the shots, and it is incredibly hard for a new company to break in because the costs are just astronomical. This concentration of power, as you can imagine, has huge implications for prices and innovation. Now, the absolute defining feature of an oligopoly is something called strategic interdependence. It sounds complicated, but the idea is pretty simple.
Each company is so big that every move it makes, a price drop, a new ad campaign, massively affects its rivals. It forces them to react. It's not a free-for-all, it's a high-stakes chess match, where you're always thinking 3 moves ahead of your opponent.
And this leads to this really interesting dynamic. As this quote lays out, companies in an oligopoly know that if they cut their prices, their rivals will have to follow suit almost immediately or risk losing tons of customers. But if they raise their prices, their competitors will probably just sit back, keep their prices low, and happily welcome all those new customers. This is why prices in these industries can feel sticky. They don't change very often, and they tend to stay stubbornly high.
So, we've traveled across the entire spectrum, from a sea of tiny sellers all the way to a single giant. But what's the big takeaway here? How does all this theory connect back to our everyday lives?
Okay, let's put it all together. You can see the whole spectrum right here on one table. Now, just follow along as we move from left to right, from perfect competition over to monopoly. Notice the trend? The number of firms gets smaller and smaller, but their control over the price gets bigger and bigger. We go from having no power over price in farming to getting some power through branding at restaurants, to sharing massive power in the car industry, and finally, to one company holding almost all the power with something like a public utility. That is the spectrum of competition, right there.
So the next time you're out shopping or you're paying a bill, just ask yourself, what kind of market am I standing in right now? Is this a world of price takers, or is it a world of price makers? Because at the end of the day, understanding who holds the power is the first step to understanding the economic world that we all live in.